Have you ever wondered how we can possibly know what someone actually wrote thousands of years ago? I mean, really know for sure? In this explainer, we're going to look at the hard evidence, the forensic tools used to verify historical texts, everything from Plato all the way to the New Testament. Let's dive right in.
Seriously, think about it. When you pick up a book by Plato or Caesar, you're looking at words that were copied by hand over and over for centuries. How can we be sure that we have anything even close to the original? That, right there, is the central challenge for any ancient document.
Now, to answer that big question, we can't just guess. Historians and scholars have a whole set of tools they use, kind of like a forensic toolkit. They're consistent rules that get applied to any ancient manuscript to see if it holds up.
The official name for this whole process is textual criticism. I know, it sounds super academic and complicated, but the main idea is actually pretty simple. It's all about looking at all the copies we have, all the available evidence, to piece together the original text as accurately as humanly possible.
And really, this whole method boils down to two key tests. First up is abundance. Just how many manuscript copies do we have? The more copies, the more we can cross-reference them to spot any mistakes. And second is proximity. How big is the time gap between the original writing and our oldest surviving copy? You know, the shorter that gap, the less time there is for errors or legends to creep in. It just makes sense.
So, to really get a grip on what strong evidence looks like, we need a baseline. Let's apply these two tests to some of the most famous classical works that pretty much all historians agree are reliable.
Let's start with a couple of heavy hitters, cornerstones of Western thought. For Plato's dialogues, we have, well, only 7 surviving manuscripts. And get this, there's a massive 1,300-year gap between when he wrote and our first copy. For Caesar's Gallic Wars, it's a little better. We've got about 10 manuscripts and a 1,000-year gap. And believe it or not, this is what scholars generally consider a reliable, though pretty limited basis.
Okay, but when we get to Homer's Iliad, often called the best preserved text from all of classical antiquity, the number just jumps. We're talking approximately 650 manuscripts. That is a huge leap in evidence compared to Plato or Caesar.
And what about that all-important time gap for the Iliad? Well, our earliest copy is from around 400 BC, but the original was put together way back around 800 BC. That's a 400-year gap. Now, that's way better than 1,000 years for sure, but it's still 4 whole centuries where mistakes could have been made. So remember that. This is our gold standard for a classical text.
All right, now for the main event. Let's take these exact same tests, abundance and proximity, and apply them to the manuscripts of the New Testament. Let's just see how the evidence stacks up.
Okay, you might want to brace yourself, because this is where the scale just completely shifts. Remember Plato with his 7 manuscripts? And Homer, our gold standard, with around 650? Well, the New Testament is supported by over 24,000 manuscript copies. This isn't just a little bit more evidence. We are talking about a completely different category of proof for scholars to work with. The number is just staggering. And now for the time gap, which, honestly, might be even more striking. We saw Plato and Homer had gaps of centuries, right? Well, our earliest New Testament fragments date to within a single generation of the original writings. We're talking just 25 to 50 years. That is an incredibly short window between the actual events and the records we have of them.
Now, having 24,000 copies, that brings up a really obvious question. It's a fair one, and it's one that skeptics often bring up. So let's just tackle it head on.
The question is, doesn't having more copies just mean you have more opportunities for mistakes? It's a totally intuitive thought. But funny enough, for the people who study this stuff, the exact opposite is true. And here's why. With so many thousands of copies, from different places and different times, scholars can cross-reference them all to pinpoint any little variations. It's kind of like having 24,000 witnesses to a single event. By comparing all their stories, you can reconstruct what actually happened with incredible confidence. And the consensus is that the original text is about 99.5% pure.
So what's in that tiny 0.5% of the text that's in question? Well, scholars are really clear on this. It's overwhelmingly minor stuff. We're talking about things like spelling differences, or maybe a scribe mixed up the word order. But here's the crucial part. Not a single one of these tiny variations affects any core belief or essential historical account of the Christian faith.
And to put that 0.5% figure into perspective, let's look back at our other examples. Remember Homer's Iliad, the best of the classics? About 5% of its text is in doubt. For another major ancient work, the Mahabharata, that number is around 10%. So when you see them side by side,
The level of textual certainty we have for the New Testament is truly in a class of its own.
So, after laying out all the evidence, using the exact same historical tests for every document, what's the final verdict? What conclusion do these numbers really force us to consider?
Let's just put the final scorecard up side by side. On manuscript count, the New Testament isn't just winning, it's an absolute avalanche of evidence. And on the time gap, we're not talking about centuries of separation, we're talking about a single generation. I mean, the numbers really do speak for themselves.
So based on the standard, unbiased metrics of textual criticism, manuscript count, and time gap, the conclusion is just unavoidable. The New Testament is, by far, the best attested and most accurately preserved document from the entire ancient world, period.
And that leaves us with one last big question. Given that the evidence for the New Testament's integrity just blows away the evidence for other classical works we accept as history without a second thought, well, it challenges us. If this mountain of proof isn't enough to be certain about the New Testament, then how can we be certain about any ancient history? What standard are we even using?